person, and Gillian Tett in New York. Thank you very much. 30 years ago this Sunday, the people of Bermondsey in South London went to the polls in a by-election. The Labour candidate, Peter Tatchell. The Liberal candidate, Simon Hughes. Mr. Hughes won with a 44% swing. But it's the campaign which still resonates. It was dirty, very dirty. Peter Tatchell's homosexuality was ridiculed by his opponents and by some on his own side, including a rival, real Bermondsey Labour candidate. The Liberals put out a leaflet saying the election was a straight choice. Tonight, 3 decades later, Simon Hughes and Peter Tatchell will be face to face again. First, here are some images from the campaign and the unmistakable voice of Vincent Hanna, who covered it for Newsnight.
Simon Hughes in person, your candidate for Thursday.
The Liberals are in a state of political hysteria since Friday's poll revealed them in second place and closing on Labour.
Don't forget, shopping this morning and voting on Thursday. This is Simon Hughes. Good morning.
Liberal candidates for the election on Thursday?
Yes.
Right, your supporters?
No.
Who are you going to support?
No one. I don't vote.
You don't vote? Why don't you vote?
Because, well, I don't know nothing about, politics and anything.
The
Against
snag
the
is
system.
that Liberals
They're
can also
able
go
to
on
do
a
it.
bit.
And that's what we offer.
We've got something to do. We can't stand here talking for that long.
Peter Tatchell, to do him justice, has continued to recite statistics and talk about policies. He remains slight favourite on Thursday, but he's clearly worried, even frightened at the campaign which is being waged against him.
There's been a lot of mud thrown in this campaign, some of it sticks. There's been an unprecedented campaign to discredit myself and the Labour Party. You all know we've got 8 major complaints into the Press Council about fabricated stories, stories which have been deliberately fabricated by Fleet Street to try and discredit myself and the Labour Party. Some of the mud's obviously stuck.
Well, Peter Tatchell, leaving aside what happened to your accent, what do you remember? You're quoted as saying it was one of the darkest periods of your life, like living through a low-level civil war. Sounds awful.
Yeah, I think that the Bermondsey by-election was probably the dirtiest and most violent election campaign in Britain in the 20th century.
And is that his fault?
Well, we'll come on to that in a minute. It was certainly the most homophobic election campaign in British history. I can remember at the time some people made the comparison between myself and the vilification of Oscar Wilde, saying this was the most sustained homophobic vilification of any public figure since Oscar Wilde in the late 1890s. That aside, what I know personally is that I had personally suffered during that campaign over 100 violent attacks while out canvassing.
What
there
did people do?
30 attacks upon my home, more than 30 death threats.
What did they do to you physically during the campaign?
Punched, kicked, spat at. It was, I had to steel myself to go out on the doorsteps to knock. Now, not everyone responded in that way. There were many wonderful, open-minded people who supported me or at least gave me a hearing. But the scale of hatred and violence, which seemed to coincide with the tabloid campaign, was truly horrific. I mean, I remember an old man who was a refugee from Nazi Germany. I remember knocking on his door and he said he'd never seen anything like it since he left Germany in the early 1930s. Now, thankfully, our society has moved on, and I'd like to think that, in particular, the homophobic campaign against me caused such a public revulsion that when Chris Smith, the Labour MP, came out the following year, he got a much more sympathetic reception, and he didn't get the tabloid stick that I got.
But between the end of the campaign and Chris Smith, why weren't you crushed by this?
I just felt that it was important not to give in. I felt that if I ran away and hid and just gave up, that would give comfort and succour to all those people who did those terrible things. And although I was standing on a broad Labour platform of social justice and equality for all, the homophobia of that campaign did make me resolve to devote more energy to fighting for gay rights so that no other person would have to go through what I went through.
Simon Hughes, you've apologised publicly and privately to Peter Tatchell before for anything you did wrong. What was it you did wrong?
Well, I got caught up in a campaign that had the attributes that Peter described. Peter has always been very fair, I think, afterwards. He wrote a book afterwards. I haven't had time to write the book, but he wrote the book. And he made clear that the 2 major targets were his own party, his own then party, the Labour Party, which gave him a really hard time. We were both paradoxically on the same side attacking the old Labour Party in Bermondsey, and I would never have won had the old Labour Party not run the place as badly as it did. And also the press, which was despicable. Now, it is without doubt that we benefited from that. Until 3 weeks before the election.
Were you just the passive beneficiaries, or did you do things which, in the cold light of day, you now wish you hadn't?
Well, in the cold light of day, if I had been in charge and wanted to rewrite it, we would have had leaflets which wouldn't have had "it's a straight choice" in them, although that was regularly used in all by-elections before and afterwards without any sexuality import. There was one event which Peter referred to when people went out canvassing with badges making fun of Peter's sexuality. In fact, I gather that they were actually gay liberal activists, and then they were told to take them off. So there were some things that shouldn't have happened. But I'm clear that it was a disgraceful campaign in terms of its homophobia, and I have tried particularly to make sure that in my time as MP I've done nothing to set back the cause of gay equality and equality, and I have worked with Peter and others. And there were moments when actually we were on the same side and others weren't. The Section 28 debate, you remember, Tories bringing in repressive legislation, Labour abstaining, that was their official position. It was my colleague Archie Kirkwood now on the committee who moved to try to challenge the Tories. And I've tried to keep up that sort of campaigning, and Peter and I were just talking, making sure, as we do now, that we have a policy that means that we will give asylum in this country to people who, if they went home, would suffer because of their sexuality.
Is there another personal aspect of this for you? You were more candid publicly about your own sexuality much later in life. I mentioned to someone today that I was going to be speaking to you both, and they said about that by-election, well, the closeted gay man won and the open gay man lost. Is it as simple as that?
No, it's not as simple as that. I mean,
I think also this issue is about more than homosexuality. I mean, when you look at the range of policies which I was attacked over, I was described as an extremist because I supported policies that are now mainstream: a national minimum wage, comprehensive equality laws, gay rights, and a negotiated political settlement in the north of Ireland. These are all mainstream policies, but when I advocated them in 1983, I was demonised as an extremist. So I think in many different ways, not just around gay issues, but a whole range of issues, our society has moved on, and that's to the credit of the British people.
But can I just pick up the wider politics? I, like Peter, I come from the radical left of politics, not the centre. I found myself active in local politics for several years in Bermondsey before the by-election, before Peter was even suggested as a candidate, let alone selected. And the battle was on basic issues that mattered to ordinary people. It was about jobs. It was about the Docklands Corporation taking over people's democratic rights. It was about housing, above all, which was grim, badly repaired. And it was because the Labour Party had failed in the inner city, which Peter was attacking from within the Labour Party and trying to change, and I was attacking from outside as the other radical party, that they were on the agenda. And you're right, most of the election, in fact, until Peter was selected finally 3 weeks before, actually, homosexuality was not a key election issue. The other things were the issue, development of Docklands, rich housing.
Okay, well, exactly. And on the policies, just as a politician, you lost a safe Labour seat, didn't you? How much was that down to the sexuality question? How much was it down to other aspects of you? How much was it down to the politics?
I feel very guilty and sad that I lost a safe Labour seat, and I have to take responsibility for that. But the choice for me was hardly there, because I found that almost at no point during the campaign was there media reportage of the policies I was fighting. I was demonised as a Marxist and a militant tendency activist, which I was opposed by the militant tendency. They didn't support me, I didn't support them. It was really difficult to get a fair hearing, so I think a lot of the voters did not actually know what I stood for. They had this caricature, and that's why at the beginning of the campaign, the opinion polls gave me 47% of the vote. 3 weeks later, it was completely reversed. But I had I didn't have 47%, Simon did.
But the interesting thing on the way, quickly, was that it was, for most of the time, a battle between old and new Labour.
All right.
Not with us.
Simon Hughes and Peter Tatchell. Thank you both.
Thank you, Eddie.
From West Yorkshire to Wembley, thousands